Good morning.
Chapter 28, 1 through 10, and Matthew. This is a little different, sorry. This is NIV. So, I'm sorry it's going to be a little problem. After the Sabbath, this is called the resurrection. After the Sabbath, at dawn, on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene and the other Mary went to look at the tomb. There was a violent earthquake, for an angel of the Lord came down from heaven, and going to the tomb, rolled back the stone and sat on it. His appearance was like lightning, and his clothes were white as snow. The guards were so afraid of him that they shook and became like dead men. The angel said to the women, "Do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus, who was crucified. He is not here. He has risen, just as he said. Come and see the place where he lay. Then go quickly and tell his disciples, he has risen from the dead and is going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him. Now I have told you." So the women hurried away from the tomb, afraid yet filled with joy, and ran to tell his disciples. Suddenly Jesus met them. "Greetings," he said. They came to him, clasped his feet, and worshipped him. Then Jesus said to them, "Do not be afraid. Go and tell my brothers to go to Galilee. There they will see me." Amen.
Well, this is Resurrection Day, yes?
Yes.
And traditionally, the color for Easter is white. And I was going to wear a white stole. And then I was watching, along with about 300 other million people, the birth of April the giraffe. April the giraffe. Some of you may have seen the news this morning. She had a baby, a little baby boy, a 6-foot-tall baby boy. And I thought, gee, in honor of April, I'm going to wear something festive rather than just white. So that is the reason for this stole. So that explains that. I want you to get in the mood of how the disciples and other followers of Jesus felt on the day of his execution. I think now that I understand why we have Good Friday services. Can you imagine if someone today said to you that they were facing their death, but don't worry, no problem, they would arise in 3 days. And even though they may be a holy person and a person that's known as a healer and a miracle worker, that is a pretty wild story, isn't it? And can you imagine the depression that they must have experienced? And especially if you were one of the ones that was actually there watching it. It must have been horrific. I can't think of anything worse than what Jesus experienced with that kind of an execution on a cross. And so on Good Friday, which to me was not a Good Friday for him, we kind of get down into the depths of our souls, and we think about, oh, how awful, this is terrible. How could anyone that wonderful suffer like that? And I can imagine those days that went by, people thinking, well, the end has come. There's no hope. The world as I know it has come to a stop, and my life is really over. But then we have the resurrection day. And Mary Magdalene and the other Mary were there, and they were told, he's not there, he's gone ahead. And can you imagine the joy? The absolute joy in their hearts? Like, wow, I have to share this with everyone. And I know that we have all ourselves gone through the crucifixion in our own lives. Not being nailed on a cross, but maybe losing a loved one and feeling that our life was over. When I was very, very young, I had a fiancé who was a person of great faith, even though I wasn't at that time. And he was a devout Quaker and spent his high school years in the summertime building homes in Puerto Rico. And I had utmost respect for him. He was a wonderful person. And we had planned a life together. He was studying to be a doctor. He wanted to go into neurosurgery. And we had even gone up to Oregon and picked out our house. An elderly doctor said he'd be glad to sell it. And this was in Beaverton, Oregon. I don't know if any of you know where that is. It's outside of Portland. And it was like, wow, I'm going to have a cool life. It's going to be kickback. You know, I won't have to work that hard. You know, I'm going to be married a doctor and have all this money, right? Isn't this wonderful? Well, life doesn't always end up the way you plan, does it? And he was unfortunately killed by a driver who had a car that was out of control, went up on the sidewalk and smashed him into a car, and he was killed instantly. For years, I felt dead. I felt that my life was over because I was so dependent on another human being for my happiness. I didn't know about Jesus at that time. I didn't know about God. And I felt so horrible. And I was even speaking of my life in the past tense. Have you ever heard anyone do that after they've lost a loved one? They're speaking in the past tense. Everything was I was, I did, he did, she did. It's like you're not even living anymore in the present. I eventually did get married and had children. And it didn't quite work out. And I think some of you understand how that is. And instead of this kickback life, it was back to college, back to a teaching credential. Work, 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 work. It forced me to extend myself because I had children to take care of. And because of that, I went back to school. I got several degrees. And I worked, worked, worked. And then, after working with emotionally disturbed children for about 10 years, 11 years actually, I said, you know, there has to be another way to do ministry than this. And this is how I actually ended up here in this church, because working with emotionally disturbed people day in and day out really puts a toll on your body. And with all the things that happened, I realized that God was there the whole time, making me stronger, making me bolder, making me more faithful. And I learned a great, great lesson, especially when I met Jesus for the first time. So often today I hear people jumping up and down and they're singing their songs, oh, Jesus, Jesus, we're all so happy, we believe in Jesus, He's my Savior and everything, and not using Him as a life model. Jesus should be our life model. He was the one who really taught us all about unconditional love. When He was there on that cross and said, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they're doing, He wasn't kidding. He understood, which we don't even understand today. How can anyone be that forgiving when you're hanging there with nails in you up on a cross? But He understood. They didn't know what they were doing. If they did, they wouldn't have done it. They got caught up in a negative rumor model. And what they had, what they had heard from the powers that be, is that Jesus had claimed that he was the king of the Jews, and that they would get in big trouble with the Romans, so they better get rid of him, or their own lives would be in danger. They believed it, because it's so easy to believe negative stuff about other people. But then, he came alive. And all the depression and feeling that your life is over and that nothing is left for you to do, just came alive again for these people who were his followers. And I think today, in 2017, we have to keep that resurrection alive. Not just today, but in every day that we live. He was very serious about what he said and what he modeled. He modeled a love that forgives all people. He modeled hanging around with people that nobody else wanted to hang around with. He modeled a love and an openness that only Jesus could really have, that we want to do the best we can to follow his example. And he also modeled a steadfast love that will never leave any of us. This is the day of resurrection. This is the day where he is alive. And if we take him into our hearts and seriously follow him, you know what a glorious world we'll have? Can you imagine what our world would be like if we really modeled his behavior and his actions? There'd be no wars. There'd no be hatred. We'd learn how to accept each other. And we'd say, look, there's always space at my table for you. So let's celebrate on this day. Let's celebrate tomorrow and the next day, and the next day, and the next day. All right? Jesus is alive, right? Alive and alive. Amen.
Amen.